Hi, my name is Jarret Keith. I'm currently a doctoral student at Florida Theological Seminary, and before that, I completed my Master's of Arts in Theology. And during that time, I was working in the criminal justice reform space while at seminary, and I began to experience being in two different worlds. One, a world that really cared about justice, those who are incarcerated, those who are coming home from incarceration and their loved ones, and also the way that society was treating those individuals, including myself being formerly incarcerated. And then I was in a seminary where we're focusing on the love of God and the freedom that's offered through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the reality was, in the space of criminal justice reform, there was a need sometimes for prayer, for truth, for things that I believe were offered to us by the gospel and by God, but there was no room for it. And then at seminary, there was a lot of amazing truth, a lot of amazing thought about what God's heart is for this world, but then I experienced a very limited, if not any, action towards actually seeking justice. And so during that time, I started a ministry that is attempting to seek gospel-centered justice, to spread and demonstrate the gospel of Jesus Christ through the testimonies of those who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated that are following Jesus. It's called Testimony Ministries. Before that, I was incarcerated, and I was incarcerated for 15 years of my life. I became incarcerated as what they call a youthful offender, and that means I was a teenager. And so I spent all of my 20s incarcerated and into my 30s. And during that time is when God entered into my life and started to offer me something that I wasn't able to find in my life before that. And that was true freedom, a true new way of relating to myself, those around me, and the world. And during that time, being a part of the incarcerated church, I definitely saw a lot of evangelistic efforts towards myself and others who were incarcerated by people coming in from local churches and other prison ministry based organizations. When I think about what led me to incarceration, it really helps me to become informed about how those experiences of churches and ministries reaching out to me were thinking about me and treating me. And so when I look back at my life, I grew up poor. The community I grew up in was poor. And the community I grew up in was suffering from a lot of the social injustices that are taking place in our world, even up until now. And so being poor, I began to realize real fast that I didn't have access to equality in this world, that I was, disposable. And so I began to respond to my environment and to the messages that were being sent to me by the world in ways that I experienced society to work. And that was anger, violence, punishment, living in a society that is about guns and domination and capitalism and consumerism. I felt like I needed to gain some sort of self-dignity, some sort of self-value, some sort of equality in this world through financial means. And of course, my family didn't have much to offer me in that area. I am the first graduate of college from my family now later in life after being incarcerated. But as a young person, I didn't know other solutions for that. And so I started to participate in all of the activities that were around the neighborhood where I was living. And in neighborhoods of poverty, there are high rates of crime, there are high rates of violence, there are high rates of drug use and abuse, and other such activities and behaviors that go along with that. And so by the time I was a teenager, I was engaging and participating in all of that, which eventually led to me being in a situation where I was incarcerated for the first time, excessively prosecuted and excessively sentenced. And I subsequently was incarcerated for 15 years. And it was a very difficult time. But going through the legal process, I felt like all the messages that I was receiving as a kid were actually reinforced, that I truly was disposable, that my life, my future, my potential didn't really exist in this world, coming from the community I came from and being a part of a family that was poor and having limited things to offer as a person of color. So when I was told by the court that the society was better off without me, and for me to potentially be in prison for the rest of my life would be a good thing for the world, I just basically believed them because that's what I had experienced my whole life. And I became a commodity. Now the state of California would make money off my body from being incarcerated every year, and tax dollars would go towards that. When God came to me and I started to hear the gospel message, it was actually through music, through songs about the blood of Jesus, and the Holy Spirit let me know that I did have value, even though I didn't experience it in the world, that I could be something more than just a poor brown person, and that maybe I had potential, something to contribute, something to give back to the world, despite what the system had said and despite what the messages I had received in the world were communicating to me for all of my life. So during that time, I began to receive opportunities to go to school, to go to church, and people would come in. People would come in from all different ministries and churches. Sometimes there was chaplains, sometimes. So at first it was just great to have people coming in from the community, to feel loved, to feel like I was valued, I was thought about. For many people, they don't have any family or friends to come visit them. So people coming in from the community as volunteers would be sometimes the only people we get to interact with. And so all of these things about ministries are a blessing. There's definitely benefits. As I look back and recognize the experiences that I had through ministries like that, I begin to see that the gospel that was being brought in was severely limited and actually communicating some messages that I've had to unlearn and that have been harmful. And so when people are coming in mostly with prison ministry, and even right now, if you think of prison ministry and what prison ministry means, it's primarily thought about as an outreach to reach criminals, to reach people who are fundamentally corrupt, fundamentally evil, fundamentally distorted, and that need help, that need rescuing. And that seems like it's aligned with the message of the gospel, to reach people who need saving. And when these ministries would come in, and I still see ministries going in with this idea of rehabilitation, that the gospel will be the best form of rehabilitation for incarcerated people. And that whole framework of the gospel, I've looked back and saw to be very harmful for myself and others, because it also reinforces the messages of society that people are criminals, that people are inmates, that people are fundamentally evil or corrupt, and maybe society is better off with them unless they're rehabilitated, or to Christianize it, transformed. And so the messages were often about God's love and God's forgiveness, and how whatever crimes we've committed and whatever sins we've committed we could be saved, and our souls could be set free, and then we could be joyful and peaceful even in prison. And that was pretty much the extent of the message. And then all of the training, all of the equipping, all of the discipleship that would be offered by these churches and prison ministries would be about how to be a better person, how to be a good citizen. And so looking back, I realized that I wasn't there because I was more evil than anyone else. that was coming in to do prison ministry or anyone else in society. I was there largely because society failed me from a very young age, that my family had failed me from a very young age, that I didn't have the solutions or the opportunities to thrive in this world that other people have the privilege of having access to. And so what I needed to hear, and I think what the gospel has for people who are incarcerated, is more about healing the trauma that's been experienced through the journey of being incarcerated, the trauma that's experienced by the oppression of the world on people who are incarcerated, the trauma that's experienced by people who are incarcerated from poverty that they've experienced. But when you view somebody as fundamentally and primarily just needing rehabilitation, I believe we're missing the actual value of what it means to share good news. So these ministries that were coming in, churches that were coming in, they didn't have any practical solution for how I was ever going to get out of prison, what I was going to do when I got out of prison. And this was obvious that they didn't think I would ever be a leader of their community or a leader of their church. The bar was so low. It was literally just, how do we get you guys to be Christian enough where you go to church on Sunday and you don't commit any more crimes and the community's better for that? The whole thrust of the gospel to have an abundant life, looking back, is just vacant from that sort of gospel message and that sort of good news. And so needing solutions for the circumstances I was in, needing circumstances for the reality of mass incarceration, needing solutions for the reality of the barriers in society that individuals face when they come home from being incarcerated, was totally something that the church and the community and that prison ministries pretty much had no idea about. And many times, people I know who do come home try to get in contact with some of these ministries, and they can't even do that because people will say, oh, we're not allowed to contact former inmates, or we're not allowed to contact former prisoners. We're not allowed to exchange phone numbers. We're not allowed to exchange emails. We're not allowed to exchange addresses, because ultimately there's a presumption that these people are fundamentally evil to the point that they may be a threat even after they profess Christ. And to live out that reality and to reinforce that reality is not good news. And so the other reality is that there's no opportunities for people in the incarcerated church or coming home. If they were to show up at a church, and I know many people who have shown up at a church, and it's like, oh, wow, so great. Welcome to our church. Come on Sundays and then go home like everyone else. No skills, no knowledge of how to practically help somebody who is incarcerated or formerly incarcerated to pursue the call of God in their life. And this is not a matter of loving people more. This is not a matter of being nicer to people or kinder to people. This is a reality that needs systemic transformation, to think about the whole reality of what the good news is for people who are incarcerated and people who are coming home who are incarcerated. I know an individual who served with an evangelism association for years as an incarcerated believer, and they loved him as a volunteer. He would pass out all of their materials. He would help recruit people. He would help spread the gospel within the prison system. And this individual was so excited to finally get the day to be free and to serve the Lord in the community after over 20 years of being incarcerated. And he had served with this ministry for over 5 years. He comes home and he starts reaching out to this ministry to serve with them. And he applies to be a volunteer. And they tell him, you cannot volunteer for our ministry because you do not pass our background check. You have a felony on your record. To me, that's just anti-Christ. It's anti-gospel. It's not the message of good news. But it's not uncommon. That's the reality that we see when we think about incarceration and evangelism. The things that I'm talking about regarding what good news is being taken in to people who are incarcerated and what does that good news have for their life once they come home is really demonstrated in this reality with how this individual was treated, how this believer who had been serving faithfully in a ministry for over 5 years was treated by that ministry once he was free, once he no longer had chains on his arms, once he no longer was in a cage, once he was in the community with the desire and a passion to serve the Lord, to serve others with this ministry, the door was slammed shut in his face. I've seen this happen over and over again. I've seen this happen within churches, within parachurch ministries. This is the reality of the incarcerated church. And so I believe a part of what I'm doing and what I believe is necessary in this time is for a new table to be created and for people who are incarcerated, the incarcerated church and coming home, to begin to lead the change, to be the change that's needed, to demonstrate the good news, the reality of redemption, a true belief in a gospel that transforms somebody into a new person, into a new creation. If we believe the gospel is real and can transform somebody into a new creation, and we believe that's happening when we're checking boxes that say, oh, 75 inmates made a confession for Christ and 50 inmates were baptized in this prison chapel, and look at these inmates praising the Lord with their hands up in the middle of a prison. But then they come home and then we say, oh, we can't actually talk to you. You can't actually come to my house. You can't actually serve in our ministry. You actually are not qualified to be a leader in our church because you have a felony on your record. Is that truly believing in what Jesus says is good news? What the gospel is? That the gospel can redeem? That the gospel can transform? That the gospel can restore? Is that a true belief in that? If we're not living that out? So these are the experiences I've had personally. These are the experiences I've seen many believers have personally. My ministry, Testimony Ministries, we serve hundreds of believers who are incarcerated and coming home, and we see this reality day after day. And it's all bottlenecked in the reality of opportunities. Where are the intentional opportunities for the incarcerated church to be empowered? Where are the intentional opportunities for believers who are previously incarcerated to be empowered within local churches, within local ministries? If there are not intentional opportunities being created and being made available for this demographic of believers, what are we doing to spread the good news? How is the good news being demonstrated? So if we're dedicated to creating those opportunities to demonstrate and display the good news of Jesus Christ through the testimonies of believers who are incarcerated and currently incarcerated.